And obviously it's important to remember that we're talking about a very broad conception of creative writing here, not just creative writing within academia, but creative writing within a number of different settings. Richard and Yann are both very heavily involved in working with groups who are, in different ways, socially marginalised. And I wondered if they could both talk a little bit about the ways in which creative writing can be particularly valuable when working with these groups. Richard, if you could...
Yes, my job is teaching English to refugees and asylum seekers. At the moment, actually, it's teenagers who are the sons and daughters of refugees and asylum seekers. For example, half my class at the moment are Polish migrants. Sorry, they're not refugees, but the other half are refugees from Eastern Africa. I also have lots of gypsies from all over Europe. Very strange mixture of people. I've got an Afghan student with post-traumatic stress syndrome. Because they've escaped from civil wars, they often have mental problems, which often manifest in the class at some point during the year. And so I'm not just an English teacher. I have to deal with lots of things. Because I was seeing all these different problems, I was trying to find out a way where I could merge the two sides of my life, in a way, my teaching side and my creative side. And I decided to set up a series of creative writing workshops with specifically refugees and asylum seekers. For example, one of the projects I was involved with was with teenagers, and I got them writing stories and poems about their heroes. Actually, if you don't mind, can I just read one? Is that all right? This is by Uche Iro, who's from Nigeria. He's 17. When I think about Nigeria, I should say I gave him the kind of template for this poem. When I think about, I smell, I taste, etc. You'll see what I mean. When I think about Nigeria, I hear the sound of the waves. I smell crude oil. I taste okra soup. I feel the heat coming out of the sun. Now I'm in Nottingham, which is where I am. I hear the sound of trams. I smell fish and chips. I feel happy about the long evenings because in Africa the night comes down on you as quick as an eagle. And just one more by Fresti, who's from the Congo. Again, he's 17. When I think about the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. When I think about the DRC, I hear the sound of the forest waving, welcoming. When I think about the DRC, I smell the smell of the Congo River, which makes the electricity, which makes the city shine. When I think about Kinshasa, I taste the taste of pandu and fufu, which make the Congolese strong. And when I think about all of this, I feel sad and angry, because in this blessed country, people suffer. Now I'm in Nottingham, I hear the sound of the snowballs smashing in my face. I smell the smell of cigarette smoke in the street. I taste the taste of different vegetables. I feel the future coming like the fastest train in the world. Marvellous stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's you can have a look at that later. But creative writing was an ideal vehicle for them to somehow express their confusion about where they were in the world. They were wrenched from their own countries for various horrific reasons sometimes. They didn't feel British, they hadn't quite got the hang of English, they were between worlds, and yet here they were enabled, I hope, to put that into writing. And they've actually performed this publicly as well, which was another big stage in the process. And all their family came and all their friends came. And it boosted their self-esteem astronomically. And as you were saying, just seeing the sparkle in their eyes, which I'd never seen before. It was quite amazing and quite humbling.
Yes, yeah. That's really interesting and very powerful poetry there. And interesting, I mean, the sixth formers who I work with, the creative writing group that I run for my sixth formers, not very far away, we're in Peterborough, but obviously very different backgrounds. But I mean, I don't know if any of you know Peterborough. The only good thing you can say about Peterborough is that it's easy to get away from there. And our students feel embarrassed about living in Peterborough and living in South Lincolnshire because it's a bit of a nothing place. It's very flat. And they were writing a few weeks ago about living in Lincolnshire, living in the Fens. We've been doing some work on R.S. Thomas, and they were using his poems as a template. And what they were writing about different landscapes, but in a very similar vein, we had this sense of them suddenly reconnecting with the landscape and with the place that they came from. And they were thinking about the flatness, and they were thinking about the hugeness of the skies and the fact that you can see so many stars at night. And one of them said afterwards, it makes you think about the place you come from in a completely different way. And you don't feel ashamed of it anymore. You don't dismiss it. You start to look at it in different ways. Really interesting. Yann, I wonder if you could talk a bit.
Well, I've said a fair amount already. I worked as part of a team, so we had people that did art, drawing. We had people that did music. There was something called the telephone book concerto that brought gales of laughter whenever he was doing this. We all started from the belief, a very profound belief, that everybody has a creative ability, but you have to find avenues so that you can get in touch with it. And one of the avenues, Michael is quite right, you have templates. And you don't even have to say, now you were going to write a poem. If I'd said that to some of the people, they would have immediately backed off. So I said, we're going to play a game. And we played this game, and we were getting writing that was the equal of what Michael was doing. I was in Dublin once doing a creative writing session, and they were all terribly serious poets, and they really blew up in my face when I said we are going to play a game. Don't play games. Poetry. So obviously I'd misjudged my audience, and that was the sign of a bad teacher in me. I would like to bring in the idea of therapy. It hasn't been raised, and I think the way that it was put was challenging. How do you handle revelations which appear to be very much cutting to the bone? And I would have, first of all, I would have said that therapy, using that word, is a well-known propaganda technique where you label something and then you say, oh, well, and this word happens to have lots of negative connotations. So why don't we call it instead an exercise in personal development? Completely changed it. What you do when you've got your teenagers pouring out the angst, I don't know. I have a lot of children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and I was using Gestalt psychology exercises with them, where they just shut their eyes, and I previously got them to go outside, feel a tree, taste the tree, and then they came inside and they became a tree. And it was amazing. They spoke through the tree, and it was liberating for them because they could talk about their personal condition, and they thought they weren't giving a thing away. And I never let them know that they were giving themselves away. And I've known a really self-confident manager do the same and give himself away with one of these things. I would have said that that is a useful exercise, A, in personal development, but B, in creative writing too. And I would take you back to John Keats and that sonnet he wrote on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Now, he doesn't give us a lot of gush about this is how he says this is how I felt. But he is talking in that sonnet about first coming across the sea in Teignmouth. He'd never seen the sea before, and he was knocked off his feet. And that same year, Halley's Comet had flown across the skies. But the images he uses are at a remove. So he's with these guys, silent upon a peak in Darien. It's not Teignmouth, it's these people first seeing a new ocean they didn't see before, and then felt I like some astronomer when some new planet swings into his ken. This way of being able to stand back from your problems and still be able to treat them is good personally, is good for literature. I know there's a lot to be said against this idea of the therapy thing, especially if you don't know how to handle this thing, because if you've got vulnerable personalities, you are going to wreck them. So I don't say that everybody should be doing this, but if you've got sensitivity, then I think you'd be able to handle it. I'd like to hear voices against at this point.
Okay. Is there anybody who wants to come in on that topic of whether the teaching of creative writing can ever be, how do we avoid this accusation that it's a thinly veiled form of therapy? Rebecca?
Coming because I'm a special surely. I would agree that it's not perhaps the most useful label to call it therapy. I guess the word that came to mind for me was sort of self-expression. I mean, obviously, that's what writing's all about, really. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I suppose it's something that I've come up against quite a few times in the course of my teaching. The good thing about it is that you can normally spot it a mile off, I think, when these autobiographical things tend to surface. Partly down to the level of emotional detail that people seem to go into. And partly because it tends to be a lot better and a lot more powerful than the other stuff that they've written. And I had a recent experience of that with a student who wrote a piece about a mother and a son where the mother was suffering from dementia. And it was very clearly based upon his own experiences. And the response of the other students, I kind of hung back, to be honest. I waited to see what they made of it. And I was very cheered by their response. They all rallied round, they praised the work, they comforted him, and in a way it didn't feel like we were teaching creative writing anymore. It didn't really feel as if we were in a writing tutorial, but sometimes that's what needed. Sometimes people do need to get whatever it is out there, and they need it to be reacted to and appreciated and understood. And maybe that's not about teaching anymore, but nevertheless there's a place for it. Although I would like to say that there is one thing that really it's a personal bugbear of mine, which is I think a lot of people do assume that fiction is autobiography even when it isn't. Obviously, when you're writing, often you might cover subjects which are quite difficult or which are emotionally charged, and I find it's a very lazy way of thinking. People kind of link that back to you and think, oh, well, this is obviously drawing on your own life, and it's something I've come up against more than once in my own writing and find intensely annoying. What I would say is that obviously, as a writer, you always draw to some extent on your own emotions, your own feelings, your own perspective on the world. But what I would say is that if I've done that in my books, I'm 100% confident that no one would ever pick it up for what it is, because I think writing is about transforming. Ultimately, it's about taking what we know and changing it into something else. And if that's therapy, then I'm all for it.
Can I just say, I think poetry is particularly good at distancing, because you have so many techniques in prosody for distancing. The actual using form is a distancing technique in itself. And Petrarch said that about his sonnets to Laura, that the sonnet is a little drop of what lies beneath. And so that little drop can, can be a huge subtext. I think subtext came up in your talk earlier. You can flag things, or you can embed them, you can bury them, and you can teach people how to do it. So they can, they can move away from the raw experience to transmuting it, as you said, transforming it into something which is they can stand up and talk about, and it is actually, I say transform it into art, but transform it into something that isn't just life writing. It's more than that.
And we have to do that, because we're not therapists. And we can't we can't assess their writing on the quality of their emotions or their outpourings.
For example, the villanelle is a wonderful form for loss. Elizabeth Bishop and Dylan Thomas are great examples. And to say to someone, talk about the losses in your life in terms of losing car keys, losing houses, and suddenly, it becomes a way of dealing with experience, which is safer and
and the discipline
it's the discipline
process
absolutely,
as well,
which is what when people say, how can you teach creative writing? I would say you teach discipline, the discipline that you're working in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think on this. Sorry.
Thank you. If we could all just give Rebecca a round.
I mean, listening to this conversation, first of all, I don't think there's a stigma attached to something being therapy. It seems to me splendid.
No, not at all.
Nothing
I'd say that perhaps it should be a separate course, though, or a separate subject.
Create
therapy
the way you
through.
have been talking about it seems to me this is, absolutely wonderful. And what Jenny was saying there somehow brought to the surface of my consciousness something I've been thinking, which is that actually the real problem area is fiction, because I think poetry, it's very clear how good that can be. The playful element, the way in which discipline and all these things, and I think that there you can really see why it's valuable and important in a whole range of things, from people in need to people who might discover that they're writers, etc. I think with fiction there is this sort of terrible problem: is where are the boundaries, where are the formal constraints, etc. And I would be all for, I don't teach it, but certainly I'd like to teach it if I were teaching it, much more like the Oulipians, the French, where you do have constraints. You ask people to write paragraphs without the letter E, to write. All right, never mind. to write simple palindromes. That again will get them, and will escape from the notion that it is. That therapy is going to be immediately self-expression. I think therapy, as you've been saying, is much more likely to occur if you're not worrying about self-expression, but engaged in the games.
The idea of stylistic exercises. Thank you. We're about 5 minutes from the end, and I think we've just got time for maybe 2 or 3 questions from the floor, if anyone would like. Yes?
Yeah, I think it's really liberating when you realise that you don't have to be a Kafka or a Brecht to be a professional writer. I write drama and cop shows for TV, so I pay my mortgage by doing character, story, and dialogue, and that's it. And I don't know if those things can be taught, but I know that what can be taught is something that took me years to discover, which is the very hard, concrete, detailed realities of the commissioning, production, and development process. And those can be taught. And the interesting thing is, once you do have a grasp on those demand that you learn character, dialogue, and stories. So teach. In some ways, if I was going about this, I teach the bit that can be taught, and let that knowledge teach the bit that can't be taught.
Yes.
I think what worries many of us is that on the higher echelons of creative writing courses like UEA, a structure is imposed. And I sometimes think I can spot a novel that comes out of a creative writing course, and I feel written at. Do any of you agree with that?
I completely agree. That's exactly my feeling. And I don't want one more well-crafted novel without a heart, as it were. If we're now talking about, as you say, the higher echelons, although I think, again, our culture may be overpraises, the notion of creative writing, as if there's something which I think makes people who don't want to do it, feel slightly belittled. And I think that's absolutely terrible. There are many kinds of ways of writing. I think there's so much of creative writing. In a way we haven't been talking about creative writing yet. When we've heard, people who are there doing it, it's about writing and engaging with people in a communal activity. But when you're getting to, as you say, MAs in creative writing, this kind of thing, people who are wanting to publish and to be, and I think that, Rebecca didn't quite answer my question, that there is, I think, a contradiction between those two things. And I think you put it terribly well, as thing being written at. It's very nice.
Yes?
I was going to say, I'm doing an MA.
Go on.
And I totally agree about the idea that you can sense when something's being written because you're being written at. And also, my class has always been, we're never allowed to discuss like the idea of being public, because it's like not the point. But my teacher's quite weird, and she'd start by saying, I don't want to talk about commercial. Make it art. But what I want to say was, do you feel that creative writing at an advanced level, so I'm not talking so much about kind of classes with like beginner writers, but at an advanced level, especially on things like MAs or kind of even more professional classes that you have to pay for, that they rely too much on the workshop element? There's one, it's different, like there are small creative writing workshops here that I went to as an undergrad, and I've taken part in kind of small workshops with lots of people I know. And that's quite a different thing, I always feel, to workshop with lots of other people who just happen to be into the same MA you are. A lot of whom, like, universities pretty much often just seem to take people onto MAs frankly because they can pay. And I think a lot of people listen far too much to what people say in their workshop, and they end up with a workshop poem or a workshop novel. And I was wondering if you felt like it's time for the creative writing industry to move on and to have less people.
Yes, I do find, because I teach on the Creative Writing Master of Studies here, and I work closely with poets, and in a very intense way. And then we go to the general workshop, at which there are novelists and screenwriters, and they're all saying things like, "Oh, take the goddess out. We don't like the goddess," or that line, the beats in that line are totally irrelevant to what the poet is trying to do, and has been, finding blindly, sort of through their subconscious, and people who are not poets and don't know what the aim of the poet is. And then he will come and say, "Oh, well, the workshop didn't like this, so I've changed it." And I said, "Why have you changed it? It was great before." So I do agree with that. Yes, you have to be very selective about the consensus of opinion that you take on board. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If necessary, don't trust anybody in your workshop. But having said that, it is the main tool for teaching creative writing. But I do think that creative writing teachers need to interrogate the workshop and see if they can change it, because it doesn't always work. I did an MA and I was very frustrated with the workshop, because I took what people were saying too personally. I felt that I couldn't be totally honest with some people because they were my friends and I didn't want to hurt them. It's a minefield. It's so I know you're meant to be objective, you're meant to divorce the text from the person who created the text. That's the whole idea of it. But in reality, it is extremely difficult. So any kind of tinkering with creative writing pedagogy needs to be done quite urgently, I think.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question? Okay. Very quick one. Okay. Yes.
Sure. I was just going to ask, with the explosion, this is something I don't think that's been covered, with the explosion of the new kind of self-publishing, where anybody can put anything up for sale, brilliant or otherwise, do you think that will affect the intake of students onto MA creative writing courses?
Is there anyone in particular who would like to answer that?
Or other writing courses?
Yes. I mean, if I can just answer in relation to my students, one thing I've noticed with my sixth formers is that over the years they've become more and more confident about sharing their writing with other people. Certainly when I started teaching 15, 16 years ago, students who wrote creatively in their spare time would die rather than tell anyone, and certainly die rather than show anyone their writing. Whereas now, lots of them blog, lots of them share their writing with other writers, and take part in online workshops. I think it's giving them a measure of confidence in terms of having a voice and being able to discuss their writing and knowing how to take part in that process of giving feedback and so on. About MA courses, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Jenny could add anything to that.
I don't think I can really.
Right.
I know I should blog and Twitter and everything, but I don't.
Right. Okay, I'm not sure about that one. But, okay.
But it could be changes.
Yes, I guess so. Yeah.
Well, can I just say, I think that some curious things are happening with publishing, where there's fewer and fewer publishers, in a sense, publishing more and more stereotypical stuff. And the fact that there are more and more little presses, let alone people, is a wonderful thing. And I think little presses are actually in the last certainly the last 5 or 6 years, have done an amazing job in bringing us books in translation that none of the larger publishers would do. Authors who had been, unable to find a publisher for many, many years, like Deborah Levy, whose wonderful novel Swimming Home just couldn't find a publisher because it was, and then it was shortlisted for the book results, so it's done well. But a small press took her up, and this has happened, again and again. And so I think that this is, there are enough causes for depression in our world, because it's certainly a cause for some kind of celebration. Small.
Yes. It's still small publishing is still traditional publishing as opposed to e-publishing. Self-publishing has become very acceptable.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. Unfortunately, we'll have to end there, but I would like to just extend my thanks to all of our panellists this afternoon for a very stimulating debate about creative writing. Thank you.